official. Apple announced it's making its own silicone chips for some of its Mac hardware. Wedbush tech analyst Dan Ives is here to talk about those changes. Also, we have our tech editor, Dan Halley, back with us too. The double Dan block. Dan Ives, let me start with you here. The switch to the new chips. I've seen some estimates out there. This might save Apple annually over $2 billion. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, it's about right. And I think ultimately it could be conservative, just given what sales and Macs could be. But I think, look, this is more important because it's Cook and Cupertino taking more control over their hardware ecosystem from a chip perspective. This is something that's really been in the making for the last 5-6 years. And they continue to be more of a position of strength here, going into this iPhone 12 cycle.
Do you think that, so then basically what I'm hearing, Dan, is you're saying Apple can really control its own destiny in a way it wasn't able to perhaps when it was in that partnership with Intel? And also, second part of that, what do you think Apple might do with all the money it saves by making its chips in-house?
Yeah, I think part of it is that they just want more control. And it's something that you've seen in Cupertino, more control over their ecosystem. It's on the Macs, you've seen it on the iPhones, more differentiation. Of course, there's the margin component. But I think what this really speaks to, especially as they go into more directions like AR and, I think some next-gen sort of technologies over the coming years, they want more control. They don't want to have to rely on partners. And this just speaks, when you talk about the cash and the incremental treasure chest, they continue to be in an incrementally better position on the other side of this dark valley, which is why I think you see a $2 trillion market cap over the next 3 to 6 months.
Hey, Dan, it's Dan. I just want to kind of ask about the way that Apple is now going to kind of be fully vertically integrated, not just from a hardware perspective, but from a software perspective as well. Do you see this as kind of the iPhoneification, if that's a word, of the Mac, and kind of ensuring that the ecosystem is one coherent system rather than several disparate offerings?
Yeah, Dan, as usual, you hit on a great point. I think what's really starting to happen, you're seeing cross-pollination between software and hardware for Apple. It just speaks to this merging. It's really part of the re-rating in the stock, but it's them just putting further spikes around their ecosystem differentiation, especially in a market where it's harder to differentiate on hardware. It really comes down to the software. That's sort of the crown jewel within Cupertino.
Dan, from what you saw, Dan Ives, what you saw yesterday from Apple, do you think that makes people go out and spend upwards of $1,000 this year on a new 5G iPhone? I read your notes every morning, and you always you've been making a clear point. The U.S. is in a recession, and it's unclear how that will impact demand for Apple's new phones.
Yeah, look, it just all comes down to pure numbers. 350 million of 950 million iPhones worldwide are in a window of an upgrade opportunity, have not upgraded in 3.5 years. That speaks to the pent-up demand. But no doubt, a COVID environment, a soft macro, you're definitely going to see a bit of a headwind. But ultimately, over the next 1 to 2 years, that's the anticipation in terms of the stock, even though there's a Category 5 storm brewing, as we've seen with the COVID.
I know maybe perhaps lost in the sauce there, Dan, was Apple's announcement, updates to its AirPods. What do you think about that? Might we see some better quality coming from the AirPods, and what might that mean materially to Apple's bottom line?
Yeah, an AirPods spatial audio and really some surround sound that they put in there, which is key because you look right now, we estimate they're going to sell about 85 million units of AirPods versus 65 million a year ago. You're talking about something that's becoming a $20, $30 billion type revenue stream. I do believe a new version of AirPods comes out going into the holiday. But I think the important thing, we saw this from our Asia checks over the last few weeks, we do not believe the iPhone 12 comes with the typical wired earpods. And I think that's key. And I do expect that that's going to be another catalyst for more consumers to buy an AirPod.
Hey, Dan, you had mentioned that we didn't see a lot about AR and VR or anything along those lines. And that's really been something that we've been hearing about behind the scenes that Apple's working on. I guess to not see it at their big developer conference, what does that kind of mean to you?
Well, I think first of all, they didn't want maybe to take some of the focus on iOS and on the chips away at this event. I do think, no doubt, it was a bit of surprise. They didn't at least drop some breadcrumbs around the AR side, but I don't think they're ready. I think it comes down an AR headset, going into the next year. And that's, if there's one area of the product portfolio that's been disappointing, it's definitely the AR. And I think it comes down to, is a consumer going to spend X amount of dollars on a headset in this environment? So I think they're also being strategically smart about what they're introducing and when they are.
Dan, we had a report yesterday that Apple might have interest in buying Sonos. Sonos shares went through the roof. I know you don't cover Sonos, but how likely would an acquisition like that be? Did we think they would have interest in Sonos, because they've really had no success, I think, with the HomePod?
I mean, if MLB comes back, there's a better chance of me playing in the MLB than them buying Sonos, in my opinion, just given their strategy and the way that they're focused.
I want to see you in the MLB, Dan. I want to see it happen.
I do have a good pitch.
Who's your team, Dan?
The Mets, unfortunately.
Dan Howley, I believe, is also a Mets fan, right? If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Howley.
Absolutely.
Before we let you go, Dan, anything you wanted to hear from Apple during that developers conference that you didn't hear?
I mean, of course, with the App Store piece, there's definitely controversy with the EU and some of the regulatory swirls. Were they going to maybe touch on that? That was something, I think some were hoping for. But I think ultimately that's it's a red zone for them to get into the developer conference. But it does speak to, they have to continue to navigate this tricky landscape with developers and the 30% cut they're taking, which continues to be front and center regulatory, not just in the EU, but also in the US.
All right, let's leave it there. Wedbush tech analyst Dan Ives, who is not bullish on Apple buying Sonos. Sorry, folks, over at Citron Research. And our very own tech editor, Dan Howley, bringing the heat as always. Thanks, guys.
Hey, investors. Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.